Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Informational Meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds.
Call this meeting to order. It's May 14th, 2013. This is Sioux Falls City Council Informational Meeting. Welcome all of you here. Our council is all here. Welcome those of you in the audience here at Carnegie Town Hall and those of you watching live on CityLink and on SiouxFalls.org. It's good to have you all involved with city government this afternoon. We'll begin our agenda this afternoon with a staff report from Jim David, our Legislative Operations Manager. Jim.
Good afternoon, Jim David, City Council staff. Within your packet, you will see that there is a council meeting video script. If you do recall, this was also emailed to each of you on May 6th. Thus far, there's been no objections to the current language by both council and staff. If you do recall, this originated from the March 13th working session's discussion on public testimony, and it was led by Councilors Rothling and Staggers. The script is modeled after a similar introductory video that's used for prior to every Planning Commission meeting. What staff is requesting is a consensus of the council to move forward with production of the video.
Thoughts from council members? You've all had a chance to review it. I took my red pen to it just a little bit, shot that back at him, but we're okay with that?
I'm fine.
All right. There you go.
Okay,
There's
great.
your consensus. We're rocking. Good.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let us know how that goes and when we're ready to have it roll.
Yeah, we could do a draft video for everyone at an informational just in case anybody sees anything or changes that need to be made.
Good idea. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
all right, thanks.
Good. Thank you. Moving on, City Council open discussion. Anything from council members this afternoon? Councilor Jamieson?
I have a comment about the item number 29 tonight on the agenda. It's the 1.8 million second reading. I had a struggle with the 63,000 for the projector at the State Theater. And today I had a conversation with Steve Williamson over there at the State Theater, and I told him of my concerns and that I was trying to find a way for myself to appreciate the public benefit of the State Theater. And through that conversation, I asked if the State Theater would be willing to offer free movies for kids on Saturdays, every Saturday, that is, who qualify, just as though we do with the swimming pool. You know, we hand out free passes so all the kids can go swimming. Do it in such a fashion that, I don't know what the parameters would be exactly, but he was very receptive to that and was willing to do that. And so that, for me, provides that bridge to the public benefit in a way that we don't provide in the city. So I guess I'm bringing that up. Steve is going to be talking to his directors and other board members for consideration, but I think he'll have a comment tonight about that. But I wanted to bring it up to the rest of the body today so you can consider it and further analyze that thought as well.
Cool.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments for Councilor Jamieson first? Are you new topic?
Yeah, no, same
okay,
topic.
go ahead.
Yes, Greg is concerned about that particular issue. But once again, I think most of you are aware that I'm concerned about how the whole process was carried out. We didn't have consensus on this at all. So maybe I'll make some few more comments about that this evening too.
Okay. Other questions or comments about that particular topic before we switch? Anybody else? Councilor Karski?
Just remembering our working session, and we did have a consensus on that. We went around the room and we kind of polled each person, and I think it was 5-3 is how that ended up on that agenda. So I might be remembering it incorrectly, but that's the way I remember that.
If I can respond, my memory is like 4-4.
Okay. No, one of us.
Which is not a consensus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember it that way. Thank you.
Other comments on this topic? We got time to talk about it tonight, too. And we know there's an amendment coming, proposed amendment. Okay, anything else under council open discussion? New topics? Anything else? Okay, let's move on to presentations. Transit fare and operations analysis, Sam Trebelcock, transportation planner.
See if I push the right button.
Technology.
Public or staff, pretty good staff. Good afternoon, Sam Trebelcock, City of Sioux Falls Planning Office. We thought it was a good idea to provide you with some information that we're putting together really during this first part of this year on affairs and operations analysis. As we started this out, you've probably heard about that we're looking at that it's been a while since we've updated our fares. So we've been looking at whether or not updating the fares would be a good idea on the transit system. And at the same time, what we've heard from our Public Transit Advisory Board is, hey, just don't look at fares, let's look at also operations too. And I think I really heard that from council too, that as we put together our long-range plan on our route analysis last year, you asked, hey, come back and show us what we're going to be doing, what we need to do in the short term also. So that's what I'm going to provide. And as you know, even next week, we're going to be looking at some situations with paratransit in terms of services, so that we thought this was a really good overall item to bring to you to give you an idea what's going on in transit. First of all, I just want to go through a little bit what fixed route and what the services that we provide. Fixed route bus service has buses that travel on regular routes and scheduled times. The days of operation service vary by the route. We have 12 routes, and it's 6 days a week, everything but Sunday, 5:45 to 6:45 Monday through Friday, and 7:45 to 6:45 p.m. on Saturday. Fixed route service also includes a seasonal trolley route in the downtown area, and then 4 school tripper routes. And this kind of shows you the map of those 12 routes that we were talking about that provide just on a fixed route basis. They don't vary from those routes. And everything within this area typically comes out of the bus stop. Everything pulses out and back into that bus stop, except for the one route, Route 11, that comes out of that southwest transfer station. Now, what is paratransit? You hear about paratransit. Paratransit is a parallel service to the fixed route system. It's an area covered by paratransit must be at least 3/4 of a mile from each fixed route bus route as required by federal rules. Sewer area metro paratransit is a curb-to-curb shared ride transportation service for persons who are, due to their functional limitation, are unable to use the accessible fixed route bus service, either some or all of the time. Paratransit service exceeds the area that we have right now locally. Our paratransit service area exceeds the federally required area. Passengers must be certified eligible per guidelines established by the ADA. Now this is a map that shows that service area. The kind of dotted line is the 3/4 mile area. That's 3/4 a mile from the fixed route. That's what we're required to provide services. Locally, we provide an area outside of that. We go beyond that. And then the color shows you kind of the amount of trips that we provided on a particular day that we took a survey. Give you a little bit of information about fixed route and paratransit ridership. Since 1996, trends have been in fixed route that we've just about doubled our ridership. You can see it was about 500,000. And just this past year, we were over 1 million riders on the fixed route system. So we've had really great increases on the fixed route system. And there's still overall some capacity there on many of the routes, although some of the routes are actually reaching capacity. On Paratransit, it looks like there isn't nearly, or it looks like it's static, but we are seeing about 5% increase lately on our Paratransit service. It just doesn't show nearly the amount that the increases that we've had on our fixed route. Revenue, because we're taking in so many additional riders, we are seeing more revenue on our fixed route system. We're coming up a little bit on our Paratransit system again, but certainly not to the extent of the ridership that we're gaining. Operating expenses, you can see Paratransit and fixed route are very similar in operating expenses, even though ridership's pretty divergent. That's because obviously Paratransit per ride is much higher. Fare box recovery, this is the amount that we recover in our operating expenses based upon the fares. You can see in 1996 we were recovering about 20%, which is really, really good. But since the time, of course, we haven't had increases in fares since 1996. Now we're in the fixed route system about 15%, and that's considering that we're increasing ridership by double. And on Paratransit, we're down under 10%. Now, as I said before, 20% sounds, I said it was good. In comparisons to other, other systems around the country, it certainly is fairly decent. You won't typically get a fare box recovery much over 20% around the country. Net cost is, excuse me, net cost per passenger in the fixed route, it's about $3.30 per passenger. Paratransit is about $23 per passenger. So you can see there's quite a difference between those two, but of course you can see why. Just because it is a shared ride service, you don't get nearly as many on a bus, and your destinations are pretty significantly different. Thank you, Tamara. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is the Paratransit and budget compared to fixed route. We looked at some different communities around the country. In terms of what it averages to our fixed route budget, 76% of the communities were below 50% of the fixed route budget. Between 50 and 75%, there was about 6 communities that we surveyed, 12% were between 50 and 75% of the fixed route budget. 6 communities were above 75%, some even maybe went over 100%. Sioux Falls is at 92%. What we're trying to show is that generally our Paratransit overall budget is higher than it needs to be in relation to our fixed route budget. We just don't think that's very sustainable. Paratransit rider has increased in ridership generally with the same number of vehicles that we've had since 2009. And what we estimate now at this point is for every 5% increase in budget, we need another vehicle, we need another employee to be able to keep up with our capacity right now. We're at capacity on the Paratransit system. Here's some of the issues that some of them I've already mentioned. We are certainly beyond capacity, especially at the peak hours. As you can imagine, at our peak hours, it's just like a roadway. We have all of our buses out there, and we have a window of time that we need to provide those services, and that's becoming more and more difficult and certainly stressing staff. Expected growth at 5% a year is not sustainable. We cannot keep doing that. At this point, each 5% increase will create the need for one new Paratransit vehicle, and as you'll see in a minute, that's going to be more difficult too with existing situations with the federal budget. Even replacing existing vehicles will be more challenging with less federal funds available, and as you know, as many miles as we put on them. We need to be looking at that from time to time. We have something called evening demand service. That's something we started about 5 years ago. It's about $160,000 a year, but that's even higher in terms of expenses per rider. It's about $70 per passenger cost. One of the things that we continue to try to look for ways to do is if there's ways that we can utilize or bring people to the fixed route system. It has available capacity and certainly is fully accessible with people with disabilities. What are some of the options that we're looking at as part of this operations and fare analysis? Travel training, getting people to used to riding the fixed route system. We've talked to you about in the past occupational therapists that we have on staff. That's starting to make some headway. We think we can make improvements, but it's not going to be the only thing that we're going to, it's not going to be the magic bullet, the silver bullet. We're looking at ways to coordinate with Achieve and Dakota Abilities. About half of our rides come from clients from Achieve and Dakota Abilities. So we're looking for ways that we can coordinate with them. We think we're starting to make headway there. That includes with Achieve, they're interested in doing something called a tripper route, a fixed route tripper route, where we could actually take people from Achieve group homes from their homes to their workplace and take a route that would, we think would be possible. A lot of cases they may not be able to travel to the bus stop. It might be a little bit too far away, but if we come closer to them, we think that might be something that might work. And we're looking for other partnerships with other nonprofit transportation agencies, including Project CAR, Meals on Wheels, and things like that, where some of them, those agencies might be able to take some of the trips that we're also taking on Paratransit right now. Of course, one of them is increasing fares. We think that's important to be looking at. It's part of the package. We don't think by any means it's going to make up everything, though, just by increasing fares. Also, one thing we'll be talking about next week is we're looking at reducing service outside the 3/4 mile area. And the main reason we're doing this is that we just need to prioritize our service within that federally required 3/4 mile area. We think we're going to start getting in trouble if we start getting outside that 30-minute window that we need to provide trips as required by federal law. So that's kind of why we're doing that, but we're not trying to take away all of it, just at peak hours. And you can kind of see what we're trying to do. That's on May 21st. One of the things we could do, we could get rid of services completely outside that 3/4 mile area if we were not able to make ends meet. We don't want to do that. And lastly, the last thing we want to do is start curbing fixed route services, because we're required to provide paratransit within 3/4 mile of fixed route. In some cases, the only resort we would have is to actually cut a route, and then we wouldn't have to provide paratransit in that area. We certainly don't want to do that, but those are things that we have to look at. Fixed route, in terms of ridership, when we looked at peer communities, just like we did, I showed you with the paratransit, we're doing a lot better on ridership. In this one, this was a couple of years ago that we looked at with our peers, but we're at just under 1 million riders, where our peers were about 1.4 million. So there's still more work we can do on the fixed route. We know we can even do better. So in terms of ridership productivity, we're actually a little worse than our peers. But when we look at cost efficiency on the fixed route system, overall, we're doing much better than our peers. So we think we provide a really good service. We just need to find better ways to utilize that service for ridership. Last year, as I talked about, we had a route analysis. We didn't recommend the grid system, as you might remember. Route changes and expansions were recommended, and 3 more transfer stations were talked about. In the operation analysis, what we're talking about is just short and maybe some midterm discussions. What are some of those? We'd like to look at expanding Route 19. We think we can do that without additional capital expenses, and that's getting out. It would take us out to the University Center and 60th Street North in that area. Also looking at some Route changes and expanding that service to all day, and that goes up in the industrial park. Midterm, we'd like to look at night service for some fixed route services rather than doing that in the paratransit system, and maybe some changes to the routes for some more efficiencies, possibly such as combining Route 1 and 11. New services to rapidly growing areas like the southwest and southeast areas, and more than anything is trying to find ways to maintain our existing service. Some of our fixed route issues. Maybe one of the big things is just right now, some areas that would be really good to have service just don't have the density to provide service yet. So we need to wait those areas to grow up before that would make sense. That happened with Route 12, as you might remember, down in the southwest area. It just didn't have the density yet. We think going back there eventually is going to be a good idea. It just doesn't provide the density yet. There's adequate capacity system-wide, but there are some routes that are getting really full. We do have some routes that are running really high on ridership and are full all the time. So we need to look at some ways to increase the capacity for those routes. The trolley's been successful, a downtown experience, but something we always got to consider. It's about $140,000 a year to maintain that. School tripper routes are very popular and provide a good deal of our ridership, but are becoming more expensive with the need. We have to keep pushing more and more buses out there. We're almost a victim of our own success here, that more and more kids are riding it, but we have to send more buses out there. So if you see our overtime costs are high, large part because we have to send another bus out there. So we know we have to at some point say, this is where we have to make the stop on our tripper routes. And so we've talked to the school district about that. Less federal capital money. This is a really big one. We're getting less capital money than we have over the past 10 years. We're probably only going to get about $200,000 a year, where this year we got $1.4 million a year. And this is something we talked about with finance just last week, that we're going to have to find ways to maintain our existing system, or if we do expand, how are we going to do that? Paratransit's rising ridership, this is a fixed route issue, and costs will make it more difficult to increase the fixed route budget. This is, again, a peer review on our fares. When we looked at fares, from 20 that were surveyed, the median was about $38 for a monthly fare. Sioux Falls is at $25 right now, so we know we're certainly on the low end. In fact, the low was 22, and that was only one community. So we know that adjusting fares does make sense, but we do know on the other side it's not the only thing for us to look at. What we're looking at in terms of fares on the one ride fare is to increase to $1.50, to increase monthly fares modestly to $30 to begin with, possibly then looking at another 5 years out, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, to increase that to $35, and maybe set up a time to increase that monthly fare to bring it more in range with the peers are. Paratransit, what we would be doing is you would increase that fare you can only increase it double to what the fixed route one rider fare is. So if we went to right now we're $1, it's $2, we go from $1.50, it would be $3. But we could also look at increasing the base fare outside the 3/4 mile area and increase the fare for evening demand service outside the services that we're now providing for fixed route. Give you an idea what would we be looking at on paratransit for amount. If we raised the fares to $3, we'd get about $120,000, $130,000 more a year in revenue. It's real money. It's certainly not. It doesn't provide all the answers though. And on evening rides, if we raise the fares to $6, it doesn't provide much at all, just because of the number of rides that we have. Fixed route, we are looking at probably less than you might expect, but what we see out there, to be conservative, is that you probably would lose a little bit of ridership if you raise your fares at least too much. So that's why we don't want to raise our fares too much too early and too much too soon. So we're looking at about $100,000 and to begin with, but certainly we think the ridership would come back up as we continue. With that, that's kind of a quick overview of where we're coming operations analysis-wise and fares. It's something we're going to bring to our PTAB board here over the next couple of months, and then also bring it back to you, and you can look at a full report here soon.
Okay, thank you, Sam. We did ask, leadership asked on Friday if this could also be handled in Land Use Committee, since it is coming to the full council on the 14th of May. But let's open this up to questions on this part of the presentation now. So,
Are we going to public services or land
public
use?
services, what did I say? Oh, sorry. Public Services Committee, which meets after this meeting. So we just were concerned that the full council needed to have more time to digest it before it became a first reading on the 14th of May. So questions on this part of the presentation, Councilor Staggers?
Yes, Sam, you mentioned we have 23 paratransit vehicles. How about private paratransit? How many vehicles do they have?
You're talking the different agencies?
The private, we have, what, two companies that operate paratransit vehicles?
Well, there's Wheelchair Express, and there might be another. I'm not sure exactly how many they do have, but as you can imagine, those fares are quite a bit higher, and for people,
Sure,
yeah,
because they have to make money.
Right, but that is something that's an option for people. Yes.
The reason I bring that up is because can't we start trying to maybe encourage more usage of the private paratransit? Granted, yeah, they charge more money because they have to make money, but it would at least maybe take some of the burden off of us.
Yes, that's exactly the sort of thing we're looking at trying to do with some of the other nonprofit transportation agencies, and certainly, and working with some of the private would be an option too, yeah.
And also one other thing too, you mentioned 1 million riders bringing in revenue of $580,000. That's not even $1 per rider they're bringing in. So what we're doing probably is double counting a little bit, aren't we?
No, what happens is, you can imagine, $25, about 70% of our revenue, maybe even a little bit more than that, is coming from our monthly fare.
Oh, okay.
So most people are utilizing that, and they're taking a lot of rides, and it's certainly probably less than $1.
If I could just clarify, if somebody takes the bus from downtown to the transfer station, that counts as one ride. And then when they go from the transfer station to somewhere else, that counts as another ride, doesn't it?
Right.
But we're only charging one time.
No, we would charge twice if they were taking, separate rides. And we have a number of different avenues for that. I mean, they can do, a one ride, or they can do a day, they can do a week, they can do, a number of different options. But like I said, 70% of our revenue is coming in where people are buying the monthly fare because it's the best deal.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Jameson?
Sam, the $47,000 that was collected in Medicaid revenue, how does that work? How do you bill Medicaid? How does...
I'm going to look back over here. It's by reimbursement, I believe, isn't it, T? Yeah, so it's by reimbursement. So somebody would book a ride, and then they would be looking at it as a Medicaid, and then we would take that and charge Medicaid.
They're not charged for that ride, and then we bill Medicaid.
Can we have you come forward? Sam, would you have her come forward and identify herself, please? Sorry. Thank you.
I'm Tirza Land. I'm the paratransit manager.
Great, thank you.
When someone rides Medicaid, we call the 800 number in peer to make sure that they are eligible for Medicaid and transportation. And if they're going to a medical facility from home, we don't charge the passenger, but we then bill Medicaid directly, and they reimburse us for that ride.
How much would you bill Medicaid?
Medicaid bills or pays us about $3.50 for any ambulatory passengers, and if they're non-ambulatory, I believe it's like $17.
Would it, seems to me if the person calling and requesting service qualifies for Medicaid because of it's a medical appointment, they're not just going to the mall to go shopping. what would it take to just turn those people over to the Wheelchair Express and Sioux Falls Wheelchair? Couldn't you just say, wouldn't that take a burden off the system? Or would it
could
not?
possibly, however, our passengers are eligible for paratransit, so they can take our paratransit service if they're eligible. Whether they want to pay the $2 or not is up to them. So if we weren't a Medicaid provider and they wanted to pay $2 instead of having us bill Medicaid, they could still ride with us. It is an option that I've thought about, but I don't know, because we can't make them take another service. If they're eligible for paratransit, they can use our service.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions on this part of the presentation? Oh, Councilor Karski is next, sorry, and then Rolfing and Anderson.
Thank you. Sam, the way I understand it, when Sioux Falls reaches a population of 200,000, we lose all of our federal funding for our transportation. How does it affect our paratransit?
Let me first answer on the federal question. What we're finding out is it changes. We lose our operating funds. We receive a pretty good amount of operating funds, but it switches to much more of our funds would come in capital. So we don't know whether or not there'll be a direct wash in terms of, but quite a few communities, large communities like Minneapolis and Milwaukee, receive quite a significant amount of capital funds from FTA. In terms of how it would affect paratransit, we would just have to start looking at budgeting much of our vehicles and building maintenance. It's part of what would be coming from FTA. So I know it would change it, but we don't know the effect until we get there.
Okay. Councilor Rolfing?
I'm always skeptical when we start counting on federal funds, and I think we need to start becoming more and more skeptical of as that goes. Sam, I think you probably agree, and we need to start looking at that as something that, as a council, we should be looking at as ourselves and not counting on that money. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I was interested in the slide. If you could go back to that, one of your first slides about the 92%. The paratransit budget is 92% of
The fixed route budget.
the fixed budget.
Fixed route budget, yeah.
And there were other cities that it was much less.
Right.
Is that because of that was interesting to me because is it because of the services that they don't provide that we do provide? Is it because other cities are not promoting it as much as we are? Is it because they are they're not as they have better private firms, as Councilor Saggers has been talking about? Can you give me a little insight?
Well, I think the thing that we've noticed, I don't think we all know all the reasons, but the things that we can point to is that when the services first started for paratransit, we were much more dependent on the paratransit. I mean, people were using paratransit, and so people got used to using the paratransit services. Fixed route services didn't, as you could see, we've doubled, from 500,000 to 1 million. So it hasn't become much of an option for people to utilize until recently. And really, even over the past 20 years ago, the buses weren't all handicap accessible. So I think people got used to using the paratransit system. Many of them, to get them to go from paratransit to the fixed route is a pretty big change. So we know that there's a little bit of a fear factor for them to move to that. Also, we know that this community is pretty big services for medical services, and so that could be also a part of it, that a lot of people live here for that reason.
For that reason, I would think that would be something that we'd want to find out why other communities are at 50 or 35% or 75%.
Yeah,
We're at 92.
Yeah, and I think also, that's one reason we brought in the occupational therapists, because it's all about functional limitations. It isn't about whether or not you have a disability. I mean, we know that a lot of people that are in wheelchairs or have functional limitations utilize our fixed route system very successfully. And so that's why we want to try to find ways to make that happen. And the travel training and working with the occupational therapists.
Are the other cities better at that than we are? I also know that there's a number of people that get frustrated with paratransit, even though they know it is needed and that we do a good job with it. They get frustrated because of the timings and things like that at times. We'll be there within 20 minutes or whatever it is, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and that frustrates them. But overall, we do a pretty good job of that, and maybe we do. I can't say this with, I hate to say it this way. Sometimes maybe we do too good a job, but we can't do too good a job for the people who need it. And so we need to check into it to see what other cities our size and things are doing that runs that percentage out of whack.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, could we have the paratransit manager back up, please? Thank you. I see we have a lot of concentration here on the paratransit side, and I guess I sort of want to provide a history of paratransit here in Sioux Falls. Basically a quick bio of when it first started and the capacities that paratransit has been at since the very first day that they've started here in Sioux Falls, and pretty much the reasonings why. Number one, I am going to say, is we are a regional medical center. People are moving to Sioux Falls for the medical services that they need and that we provide here. The paratransit, when it first started in 1990, actually was provided by private companies here in Sioux Falls. And there was a bigger need for that, and that's, I believe, why the city decided to move in that direction. But if you could talk to that a little bit and, just give us a little more history about, basically how paratransit has been at capacity, what you do to try to keep those numbers. As we saw in one of Sam's graphs there, we've kept the numbers, pretty much the same. They're always going to climb a little bit, but the reasons why and what type of things that we've done to move people off of the paratransit over to the fixed route.
On the slide that Sam had, it didn't show much increase because it was counting by the thousands, but our ridership increases about 5% every year, and as Sam had said, each 5% is probably another bus that we need, which we haven't increased. So every year it gets a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter, and we're to the point now where we're pretty much over capacity. And we started with last April we had some occupational therapists who started with us, and they're doing the interview process with us and actually doing some different assessments throughout the interview, actually doing what they need to do to ride the bus, and they're actually riding a bus sometimes. And it's been found that some of the people who've been riding with paratransit could actually ride the bus sometimes, and so then they've been made conditional where they ride paratransit just when those certain conditions are in existence, like the snow and ice. If there's snow and ice, they might ride paratransit instead of the city bus. But if none of those conditions are present, then they would be expected to ride the city bus, and that's where our travel trainer would come in. In our travel training, we have a classroom travel training once a month available to anybody who is, you don't even have to want paratransit to come to this travel training class that we have once a month at our office. And we also have one-on-one travel training where we have one of the paratransit staff members go out and meet a person at their house, walk with them to the bus stop, ride it to where they're going and possibly ride it back home when they're done with their appointment or whatever the case might be. Does that answer your question?
Oh, it's just more of a statement that I basically wanted to start getting out a little bit here first. With our ridership as it is now, we are at overcapacity at some times. How long has that been for? How many years?
It's probably about, I would say, I mean, every year I bring it up. But right now we're at the point where we just can't do it anymore because our drivers are, they're hurrying, and we don't want them to hurry. And we, our on-time percentage is going down. We have more complaints that people are getting picked up late. They're on the bus longer. This year is the big year, it seems. That I think that in the past 3-4 years, where our ridership has increased, we haven't had an extra bus. We've been able to absorb it, but we can't do it anymore. We just can't.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. We're going to bring this conversation then and look at the proposals, specific proposals at public service after this meeting. Do you have another question, Councilor Anderson, or do you want to save it for that? Or
I can save it for that. As I've said before, and if people who know me, when the Paratransit unit first started here in Sioux Falls, I was the second person they hired. And I drove Paratransit, I trained Paratransit drivers. It's a great service. Just as Councilman Rolfing was stating, we may have made some mistakes early about maybe a little over service, but it is something that's greatly needed. And I feel that looking at the nonprofits, the medical community especially, we need to see if we can create some partnerships with them to help sort of resolve some of these issues. They do have transportation available, and it's not used.
okay, great. Thank you all. Thanks, Sam. We'll talk more later. Thank you. Moving on in our presentations to the Aquatic Facility Master Plan presentation by Tori Miedema, Park Development Specialist, and Don Carney, apparently. Come on down.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Don Kearney with Parks and Recreation. Today we're pleased to be able to present our citywide aquatic facility master plan that will really provide us direction for aquatics over the next 10 years as a city. I also wanted to let you know that at our April Parks and Recreation Board meeting, we did present this plan to the Parks and Recreation Board, and the board unanimously approved this plan and the recommendations contained in it. And before I turn it over to Kevin Post, Kevin's with Councilman Hunsaker and Associates. They're a national aquatics consulting firm. I did want to thank several groups of people that were involved in making this plan a reality. First and foremost, the City Council members, Mayor, appreciate your support for having the plan in our capital improvement plan and encouraging us to get this plan done. I think it was a great exercise. It provided a lot of insight on future needs of our community, and so we certainly appreciate your support for that. And then also, many of you were involved in those preliminary meetings, attended the informational meetings, the stakeholder meetings, and we certainly appreciate that as well. I'd also like to thank the Parks and Recreation Board. Many of them have been at a lot of those meetings as well. Been talking about aquatic needs as a department for quite some time, and many of them are here tonight as well just to show their support for the process. And then I do think we had a significant level of public participation. The neighbors of these facilities that we're talking about, interested citizens, the Aquatics Association that's newly forming, but also those other aquatic facility providers that are in Sioux Falls. We had good representation from those other facility providers, both from a private standpoint and a nonprofit standpoint. And then finally, to thank our staff that worked tirelessly on the project, Tori and Alicia and Kelby and Dave and Gene, who heads up our aquatics program. We're all instrumental behind the scenes to make this planning project a reality. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Post with Councilman Hunsaker to walk you through the plan. Kevin?
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The agenda we have today is basically to go over the entire process that we did over the past 4 months and do it in a very quick and efficient manner. So I will be opening it up to questions at the end if you want me to go back and cover anything. We're going to talk about our progress to date, look at the aquatic toolbox that we presented last time I was here, the existing facility baseline where we started our master planning process, the 2 aquatic master plan scenarios that we developed and analyzed throughout this process, look at the sites analysis and the bullet points of the sites we looked at, and then end with our recommendation for the aquatic master plan system. And then we also presented this to the public, and at the end we have the listing of the public comments kind of categorized to see where they were directed for the most part. So our progress today, we began this process back in January where we did an assessment of all your existing aquatic facilities. You see that in the appendix of the report that you have includes our full documentation of that assessment. We also did presentation of national trends in aquatics through various stakeholder groups and also held a public meeting to make sure to gather as much input as possible. With that information, we developed our aquatic toolbox and presented that back in February. And then in March, we had the first draft of the recommended aquatic plan. We did a public input meeting. We presented the recommendations to the public and gathered that input. And then we came back in April and presented that to Park Board where they did adopt the plan. So based on the feedback that we gathered in January in our public meeting with our stakeholders, we developed an aquatic toolbox. This was meant to be kind of puzzle pieces that we could play with as we're looking at different aquatic system scenarios. It was meant to cover everything that we heard during the public input from indoor facilities, outdoor facilities, recreational facilities, competitive facilities, spray grounds, pools, kind of have a little bit of everything. And the goal here was not that any of these were a specific facility design, but rather a conceptual layout in terms of size and budget that we would need to service a certain area. Option 1 was a spray ground. It was a 1,200 square foot spray ground with interactive features similar to what you have at Pioneer. Option 2 was a small family aquatic center, and this was an 8,500 square foot multi-purpose outdoor facility. I compare this very similar to Drake in terms of size and amenities. It is a little bit smaller footprint because it's all done in one body of water. Option 3 is the medium family aquatic center. This now has 2 bodies of water, which is a full outdoor 50-meter competitive pool and also a 7,800 square foot outdoor leisure pool. Option 4 is our first of our indoor facilities, which is we call the community indoor facility, which included an 8-lane, 25-yard lap pool and also a 5,200 square foot leisure pool. Option 5 was the large indoor, which now included an indoor 50-meter by 25-yard competitive pool, which is the definition of an Olympic-sized facility, and also a separate 3,700 square foot leisure pool. And then option 6 was our 50-meter, and this was strictly an indoor 50-meter competitive venue facility, kind of meant to relay back the needs that we heard for offering venues and high-level sports. So as we started our analysis in terms of what we needed for the aquatic master plan and serving different areas, we started with the baseline looking at where your existing facilities are located. We then put service areas around each of those facilities based on the type of facility that they offer and the experience that we've seen in terms of what they can serve because of people's willingness to drive to those facilities changes based on what's being offered. So we use a 3-mile radius around each of the family aquatic centers, which are your newer pools in the city. And then the others are classified as traditional pools, and we used a 2-mile service radius around each of those. And then the spray grounds and wading pools typically serve the area directly around them, even though people will drive farther distances on occasion. So we utilized a 1-mile radius around each of those facilities. As you can see on this map, we have numerous overlapping service areas and boundaries, and we also see some areas that have gaps and are less serviced than others. We also looked at the current utilization of all these facilities. So this is looking at the seasonal attendance for each of the facilities, and they're ranked for the most popular or most attended facility down to the least. The average days of operation for all these facilities is between 70 and 80. The reason there's a range is each of these facilities are open a different amount of days. They start to be closed at the end of the season as attendance drops off just for efficiency. But we did see that Drake Springs, Terrace, and Laurel Oaks, which are all of your newer family aquatic centers, were significantly higher attended than any of the traditional pools. Keene was the next highest of all your traditional pools. Which also, if we looked at our service area map, is the only one that has no competition in the area. It's not overlapping service areas with any other of the facilities. And then it goes down with Frank Olsen, McKinnon Wading Pool, and then Spellerberg at the bottom. Pioneer did not have attendance for the last days because they weren't charging admission to collect that data. Existing pool summary. So what we found is the traditional pools have reached the end of their useful life. The typical life of an outdoor pool is about 30 to 50 years. As you can see in the appendix of the report, we noticed numerous compliance issues with each of those facilities, and it's really past the point where it makes sense to repair those pools because of their age. Beyond that, the physical obsolescence, they're also functionally obsolete, and we see that on the attendance with all of your newer facilities. In fact, if we go back to the this chart right here on Drake Springs, you can see from 2008 to 2009 what changed. Well, the facility changed in terms of what it was offering. The attendance went up quadruple, just because we are now offering a newer facility, offering the amenities that people want to see and want to have. And so that's dealing with the functional obsolescence, which we've seen that the traditional pools are really not meeting the needs of today's aquatic users. There's also a need for indoor water. There was a lot of opportunities that the community does not offer for year-round programming. We heard comments from the public that the children need something to do in the winter for recreation when it's extremely cold outside. We also need opportunities for seniors and veterans to do year-round aquatic therapy and programming. Any type of outpatient rehab that can be done in the pool needs to be done year-round. It can't be a seasonal opportunity. And then also the ability to teach kids to swim as a life safety skill and offer that lesson program in a year-round manner. Other indoor providers either have limited access for some residents, whether they require a membership or a higher due, and also many of their programs were at capacity, so we felt that there was a need for the city to offer an indoor opportunity. We also found there were overlapping service areas. We saw that Spellerberg and Frank Olsen areas are served by other existing family aquatic centers in those boundaries. And then we also saw that there's gaps in growth areas that we need additional capacity in the southwest, and we'll show some maps here in a second that illustrate how strong of a population and a growing population that is, yet it has only one facility servicing it. So next thing we did is, knowing that the traditional pools have reached the end of their life, knowing that in the next 10 years that we're looking at, they will probably need to be shut down, and we've passed the point of operation and ability to be repaired. So we looked at what you have left. So what we have is the 3 existing family aquatic centers. We also have the McKinnon wading pool and then the Pioneer Sprayground. So this was our new baseline, saying that this is all we have left that is sustainable. How can we now add to this to make a full system? So the next thing we looked at is, it's not just where we place them, where the facilities are and service areas, but making sure that it's where the people are. So this map is illustrating the population density from 2012. The orange areas are showing more densely populated, where the yellow is less densely populated, and then obviously the green and the blue are outside the city boundaries. And what we found was there's basically 3 pockets of dense population. There's one centrally located, one out to the east, and one out to the southwest. More importantly than just how many people are there, it's also how many people there are typical aquatic users. We typically see the primary use for aquatic facilities being with families with young children. So this map is illustrating households with people under the age of 18 and looking at, again, the different density. And again, so what we look at, we do have the area out to the east and out to the southwest that were densely populated and also have significant amount of households with people under the age of 18, whereas when we move to the center of the city, that is an older population. So it does have a dense population, which is typical, with a downtown living scenario, but it's also our older population. So based on that information, we developed 2 different scenarios. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just going down one direction, but we wanted to analyze 2 different opportunities, because we did hear different comments from the public about what their desires were. So the scenario 1 included adding a centralized indoor facility, which was the large indoor, an outdoor pool to the southwest, which was the medium family aquatic center, and adding a spray ground to the east. And then we would maintain the operation of all the other facilities, including your 3 traditional pools, McKinnon wading pool, and Pioneer Spray Park. Applying the same service areas around each of those facilities, using the 3-mile radius for the Family Aquatic Center, the 1-mile radius for the spray grounds, and now utilizing a 5-mile radius for an indoor facility. We see that this scenario improves upon our existing gaps, and then also provides indoor aquatics for the entire community with one centralized facility. We looked at what those would cost for each of those different projects, looking at about $18.5 million for the indoor facility, $8.4 for the medium family aquatic center, and about $630,000 for the spray ground. and then also looked at the attendance, the potential revenue, and also the anticipated expenses for each of those. So we not only have a total dollar cost to build those facilities, but what it would impact in terms of our operations. I did want to point out, it was mentioned earlier that the city subsidizes several entries for the swimming facilities, making sure that all the kids have access, and all of our revenue assumptions have assumed that we're going to continue with that, that we will continue to subsidize those entries, which is why a lot of these recapture rates are a lot lower than what we typically see around the country, because we are subsidizing about half of our entries. Aquatic Master Plan Scenario 2 was more focused on what you currently have, kind of re-implementing a 1960s, 1970s model where we have a neighborhood pool, very easy access to everyone. So that included replacement of all traditional pools, so we would maintain an outdoor aquatic facility at each of the sites, adding an indoor facility to the north and an indoor facility to the south, and now we're utilizing the smaller facilities since we'll have two, and then maintaining operations of all other facilities, including the family aquatic centers, and the Sprayground, and the wading pool. Looking at Scenario 2, applying the same service areas that we use for Scenario 1, you can see we have numerous gaps in our service areas because now we've increased our service area beyond the 2 miles out to the 3 miles with the newer facilities. We also see that with the indoor facilities, about half their service area goes outside of the city boundaries. By locating those north and south, only about half of our service is even going to have where the population is. We did a similar analysis looking at the cost to build those facilities. Each of these facilities is less expensive, but there's more of them, so the total cost is a little bit higher. And also because there's more facilities that are less efficient to operate, and they have a higher operational subsidy each year. As a quick comparison, Scenario 1 had a total project cost over the next 10 years of about $27.5 million, where Scenario 2 had a total cost of $40.7 million. Scenario 1 included 4 outdoor facilities, 1 indoor facility, and then 3 spray grounds or wading pools, where Option 2 had 6 outdoor facilities, 2 indoor facilities, and then 2 of the spray grounds or wading pools. The benefit of Scenario 1 is it's a more sustainable system for long-term operation. We're seeing more communities are concerned about not only what's it going to cost to build us, but what's it going to cost us to operate these for the next 50 years and make sure we do that in a sustainable manner. It also meets the needs of all users. We have a blend of indoor, outdoor, competitive recreation, and a service for the entire community. And it does offer 50-meter competition, which again is the requirement for the FINA international standards and also summer season in USA Swimming. The downside to this is it's going to have a further drive time for some residents, being that we have a centrally located facility. Some of the residents on the outer areas are going to have to drive further to get to that. And also without having family aquatic centers in every neighborhood, some people will have to drive farther to get to their closest outdoor pool. Scenario 2, the benefit is we have closer proximity for most residents. We have more facilities, more locations, therefore we have more people who can have access in a reasonable time to each of those facilities. The downside is we do have a larger subsidy and capital cost compared to Option 1. We had numerous overlapping service areas. Several of the areas went outside the city boundaries, as I pointed out. And then also, Scenario 2 did not include any 50-meter competition facilities for the summer league or for summer training of those swimmers. Based on the analysis of those two scenarios, looking at the ability to cover the entire city, also recommendations based on other industry trends, national research that we've collected, other systems that we've implemented, we recommended that Scenario 1 be considered for implementation. So the next part is looking at where these facilities would actually be located. On the first part, we were just doing generic circles, saying centrally located, southwest. Now we need to look at what sites would be available to serve those needs. So we got a list of sites from the city, and we classified them. First, we classified them into what area they would meet the needs of. So whether it was classified as a central facility, an east facility, a north facility, a south facility, or a site, and then looking at and comparing those together to see which ones would work best. As we looked at the Sherman Park, it was a centrally located facility. However, it's pretty well built out right now, and while it meets all the other criteria to offer that centrally located indoor facility, we would have to remove an existing amenity, which would then have to be replaced somewhere else, and that cost was not included in our cost estimates. The Longfellow Elementary was another centrally located. However, it had limited space available. We could not fit the large indoor facility on that site. Nelson Park, which is the former Drake Springs, was also centrally located. However, we know the reason we moved Drake Springs from there is we know that there was water issues and unstable soil, so we wouldn't recommend building a new large indoor facility there either. And then Spellerberg Park has an existing facility, and there's no known issues at that site. The Sanford Sports Complex was up to the north. There was no known issues. We have plenty of land available. School for the Deaf was out to the east. The challenge here was it was not city-owned property, and we're trying to look for something that was already city property. Frank Olsen was out to the east. We have an existing facility there. There was no known issues. The Ice and Rec Center to the south had limited space available. We could not fit the large facilities. Keene to the southwest had no known issues. And then we've also discussed with the city about purchasing land, possibly out to the southwest, since that is an area of growth. Also had the young families. However, there is no city-owned land, and there was limited land available for purchase. So looking at all of that, our recommended for aquatic system is to maintain the existing family aquatic centers at their current locations, maintain the wading pool at McKinnon, and maintain the Sprayground at Pioneer, which will include, you can see there are some items in the audit report that will need to be addressed over the upcoming years, making sure that we're up to date with all the ADA standards. So they will need some ongoing maintenance costs as well. And then the first addition would be to add a large indoor facility to Spellerberg Park. We want to make sure we maintain an aquatic presence at that park site. We have a pool there. We don't want to remove an existing amenity. And we've heard a lot of comments from the neighbors in that area that traffic is a major concern. And as we saw what happened with the implementation of a new outdoor facility at Drake, we would expect the same thing to happen there, which would double, triple, or even quadruple the attendance and therefore the traffic. We don't feel that that area can handle the traffic from a new outdoor facility. And it is centrally located for all residents. The next would be adding the Sprayground to Frank Olsen. This would be maintaining the aquatic presence at that park site again. We don't want to remove an aquatic amenity from an existing site. However, that area is served by the existing family aquatic center, so it doesn't necessarily need to be another family aquatic center. And then we need to add a medium family aquatic center to Keene, again maintaining that aquatic presence since it does have an existing pool. The area is not served by other family aquatic centers, and there is a need for a larger facility out there with more capacity due to the growth and the young families in that area. So as we remap that, just adjusting the central locations of those service areas based on the actual sites and not just generic spaces, we see that we do maintain coverage of the entire city with that recommendation with those sites. And actually by moving the site to Spellerberg, we had better coverage out to the southwest because it was a little bit more south and a little bit more west than what I had originally plotted as the center of the city. So that really worked out well with all these different sites. To prioritizing what we need to do first, we really looked at the age of the existing facilities and what their expected life was for the pools that we're going to need to close down so we can try to maintain these aquatic facilities at each of these sites until funding is in place to build the new facility. And so we recommended that the first be replacing the existing Spellerberg pool with the large indoor that would need to happen in the next 2 to 3 years and would have a total cost of $18.5 million. We would replace the existing Frank Olsen pool, which has the next shortest useful life. We need to be done in the next 3 to 5 years at a cost of $630,000. I will point out that this is our kind of recommendation based on what we saw. However, it could last a lot longer, and we do think that keeping that facility open as long as it's sustainable makes sense, but we know that's going to need to be shut down in the near future. And then lastly, would be replacing Keene Pool, which was your newest of the older pools, which we do feel it has about 7 to 10 more years in its existing life, and would have a total cost of $8.5 million. So we presented all that information to the public, answered questions, and also allowed them to write their comments down on cards. The next several slides are the documentation of each of the comments. I'm not going to go through each one, but what we did was we categorized them by kind of hot topics that we heard to see what we were getting more and less of. The top one was the need for an indoor. The next, we had several comments about the Spellerberg site for people who were for it. We also had comments of the Spellerberg site for people who were against it. We had comments about the Frank Olsen site and also just the community out to the east. Comments directed about the VA, impact of the proposed plans on other providers or the city, and then some general comments and general questions. The good news was, from the comments we heard, I think everyone was supportive of the need for an indoor aquatic facility. Everyone really felt that that was something that was missing. We received the most comments. The only really disagreement was where it was located. But everyone agreed that we needed an indoor facility. It was really determining where the best spot for it was. You can see we had numerous comments going on 2 full pages of comments about the need for an indoor, do it now, do it first, get it ready. So very supportive. The next was comments directly related to the location of the indoor facility at Spellerberg. Again, we see that we have a full slide of comments that of people who are for it, both from people who live in that area who feel it would be a great opportunity to invest back in that neighborhood. It's something that they would like to utilize, and I like the convenience of it being located there. We also heard comments against it, that people felt that it would impact that neighborhood negatively, and that it would have long-term impacts on them, and that the existing pool was a better need. We looked at the Frank Olsen to the east. There was comments that people liked option 1, except for the fact that it recommended a Sprayground at Frank Olsen and not an actual pool. I think I agree with these comments. The comments were that there is a strong population out there. It also had a young community. However, we had to prioritize where we're going to spend money over the next 10 years. I do think that when 10 years is up and it's time to reevaluate this plan, that's going to be the next area of need that we need to focus on. But based on the priorities and the rankings and what I felt was a reasonable amount of facilities to build and monies to spend, it was at the bottom of the list. So I don't disagree with any of these, but it still didn't really change what I thought was the best thing to do. The impact of the proposed plan, there were some concerns about basically existing facilities. One of the main ones was Wildwater West, also other providers like the YMCA and YWCA have lesson programs. During our park board presentation, we commented on this. We've talked with each of these individuals and basically said that the city is not here to compete directly with any of these, but to complement and to serve what population is not being currently served. I recommended that before any of these facilities be implemented, before programs are developed, that we meet with these providers to make sure that it goes along with what their plan is, and we're not in direct competition. They all seem very pleased with that, and we're very supportive of the plan thereafter. The VA, we had a couple, one comment that would negatively impact opportunities at the VA. We had 2 comments that it would actually be a good amenity to add, being close to the VA, having an indoor aquatic facility to offer those different programs of aquatic therapy. And then we had some, again, general questions and general comments, which we did address and try to make sure that we got in touch with each of those individuals to make sure their concerns were heard. As a final point, when it was asked during the public, during our last meetings, if this would be available, and the final report that you have is available online on the city's website. We've included the link on this PowerPoint so that they can see it during this meeting, but then also this PowerPoint, I believe, will be put up there as well as a presentation, so they'll be able to see it ongoing.
Great. Thank you. Questions from council? Councilor Entman.
On the recommended aquatic system, you mentioned in here, as far as Spellerberg goes, you recommend adding the large indoor facility to Spellerberg, but you said the area cannot handle traffic and parking from an outdoor facility, and you referenced Drake Springs. Why is an indoor facility better suited then as far as traffic is concerned?
Indoor facilities are just very different use than outdoor facilities. A lot of it is the opportunities that they're offering, and then also the hours of the day that they're open. So an outdoor facility is typically, when it opens at noon, we have a huge line of people wanting to come in. They stay a longer period of time, and we may only see that rush come in twice a day. It's only open for 8 hours. It's also only open seasonally. When we move to an indoor facility, it's now open 17 hours a day. We usually see a morning, an afternoon, and an evening. It's also typically programmed activities. Not as many people come just to spend and recreate. They're coming there to maybe do swim laps, participate in swim lessons, or other programs. And so the times can actually be spread out throughout the day. And so the impact at any one time is basically spread out. And so it's not a heavy inflow at any one time for an indoor facility, where we do see that at outdoor facilities.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor Anderson, then Rothing.
With the indoor facility, again, to continue what Councilman Edelman was talking about, Okay, now you're talking about having a spread out time period of people coming in and utilizing that. Now, what happens during those rush periods? What does the traffic look like in that area at that time, or when they have a swim meet? Where is is the parking going to be adequate to hold buses and that type of traffic in that area?
Well, for one, the large rush for an indoor facility, let's say it is on a Saturday, so it's a weekend and it's the only facility open. Even with all those criteria, it's still less than an outdoor facility. This is just from my experience of working at both indoor and outdoor facilities. It's just not as heavily used for a recreation purpose as it is for a program purpose. Now, the program side, if we have a swim meet, there would be a large number of people coming to that facility. But that would only happen maybe a handful of times in a year. In terms of the ability to offer large meets, there's only 2 or 3 opportunities a year that they have to go out to bid on it. It has to be accepted. It may only happen every couple years. And then most of the meets will be smaller meets that will be more localized. And during those opportunities, we have talked with the city, and the goal will be to try to get as many of the team buses off-site, have shuttling opportunities from other locations to bring people in, so it's not a huge rush of cars, but rather it's just people coming in. And my estimate would be that would happen at most 6 to 10 times a year.
Okay, if I can continue. Also, during your presentation, you stated several times about a centralized facility. When we did this aquatic plan, where was the weight on a centralized facility against just a facility?
Well, the need for an indoor facility was seen it was just heard from comments across the board. The reason we started looking at a centralized is indoor facilities are more expensive to build and they're more expensive to operate, and the most sustainable manner is to develop as few of those as possible that you need to service your market. So I looked at doing a centralized facility that would have a service area that could cover the entire city versus needing 2 or 3 facilities that service area or that would need to cover the entire city. So that's where the centralized was really looking at. That's the way we can do it with one, where if we went to a non-centralized, we would need 2 or 3.
And last question, Frank Olsen Pool. When taking a look at that and talking about removing the pool and putting in a sprinkler park, did you consider that entire area and where are those kids going to go to swim?
Well, as we saw, with those service areas and the attendance records, there are still people who go to Frank Olsen, but I believe that once those newer facilities open, some of the people who historically went to Frank Olsen started going to the newer ones. So I think there is still capacity and ability for them to be covered there. And I comes back to my comment. I agree that I think that is going to be the next area of need. But with prioritizing what we need to do in the near future, it was because we have other facilities in that area that can service it. It was at the bottom of the priority list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rolfing.
2 comments, if I could, or questions, if you would. I'm not a swimmer, as you can probably tell. I have 2 short arms, 2 shorter legs, but I think that a swim meet may be similar to other athletic events, if you will, where kids will come in areas, if you will. The 10-year-olds will come, then the 12-year-olds, and then the 13-year-olds, and then they will leave, and another one will come, or a group will come, because the capacity of one facility is not to have everyone there at the same time. So the capacity of the facility dictates how many people are going to be there, rather than the event itself. You can't have the whole swim meet stay there and be part of that and be at that facility like that the whole day. So you're not going to have an overabundance of cars there that they can't handle, simply because they can't handle it inside the building, and they can't handle that many people inside the building at one time. They've got to shuffle back and forth. So you're not going to have, am I explaining it correctly?
Yeah, you are, and there's a lot of opportunities and flexibility with because it's a programmed activity, we are going to be planning it. We can schedule it how we see fit.
Right.
Swim meets can be broken up by age groups. As you mentioned, they can also be broken up by abilities. So it's, you know, the BC swimmers versus the A swimmers are different weekends. 10 and under meet is this weekend, 12 and over is the next week. So
Well, I'm even talking during the weekend. You've got the Bs in the morning and the As in the afternoon
oftentimes
or
those are even
whatever.
split up to different
Right.
meets. So it's the entire swim team will not be swimming on the same weekend.
Right.
It will be broken out, yes.
Exactly. The other comment I have is the same along Councilor Anderson's, and that is the Frankels and putting a spray park in there kind of bothers me. I'm just wondering what the cost difference is between a leveling or raising, if you will, what's there now, and just redoing the hole that's there and putting in a new hole and keeping the park basically the way it is right now with a new swimming pool.
Well, the cost would be very similar to what we allocated as the small family aquatic center. The shape of the pool doesn't necessarily dictate the cost. Most of it's the size. So we're looking at about a $4 million project as opposed to the $630,000. And I wouldn't recommend redeveloping a 1960s pool if we're going to be spending that much money. We might as well make it a more popular amenity. And I think that is an appropriate solution. It's just obviously added cost and added expenses that are not included in my recommended plan.
Okay, Councilor Aguilar, please.
In your projections as far as the cost, the subsidy that the city would have to make for operating these, is that based on current fees that we charge?
Yes, it's all based on current data.
I attended the public presentation that you made, and you went into more detail as far as the subsidies in comparison to other communities that are similar. Could you go into a little more detail about that for the council?
Yeah, we did a survey of other family aquatic centers across the country, and what we found was most of these more modern facilities that are generating this large attendance that we see here are able to generate about 80 to 90% of their operating expenses through their operational revenue, so they're only subsidizing about 10 to 20%. So we looked at, you know, why is that? Why are we so much less here in Sioux Falls? Well, the first thing we looked at was what we're charging. The actual fees that we're charging to get in are appropriate. They're right in line about that kind of, we saw the average is about $4 to $6, and we're right around there for our family aquatic centers. And so then we looked at, okay, well, what else is missing? And it was really the subsidized entry. And what we found was about 40 to 50% of your entries are subsidized or basically free admission. When typically when we do this plan, we allocate about 2 to 5% of free admission for that subsidized entry to make sure we do offer those opportunities. So that was the main difference in those operations of what we saw around other communities was that we're subsidizing about half of our entries as opposed to you know, about 5%.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other questions from council? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, how many?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm not following my list. I'll have you wait one time because it's Councilor Karski next. I'm sorry.
Thank you. 2 comments and a question. I guess first comment, kind of surprised by Councilor Rolfing with your athletic physique and streamlined body. I would have thought you'd be a real good swimmer.
Like a rock.
Second, the question is, how much input or consideration does this give to the private pools, the nonprofit organizations? Did you receive a lot? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, they were all invited to our stakeholder meetings, and most of them participated and then continued to participate throughout. As I mentioned, we did hear some people were concerned about what that would do to them, and I made the recommendation when we were in front of the park board that the city not do anything without including them as we go further down this plan. One of the big areas was that we had you know, large lazy river illustrated for the Southwest, which would be the closest facility to Wildwater West. I said, you know, this is 7 to 10 years out. A lot of things are going to change with what you're offering. A lot of things are going to change with what the city's offering. So my recommendation was before the facility is designed, that they're invited back to the table. We can understand what they're currently offering, what their plans are, and we don't design anything that directly competes. They were very satisfied with that answer. They were very complimentary that we've been involved and on the phone with them. So I think as long as we take that approach before anything is finalized or detailed, the specific facility has input from those groups and we don't directly compete with them, they're very comfortable with it.
And the last, more of an observation, I guess, is it's been 9 months since we've had public swimming available to anybody in Sioux Falls at any public pool. So just a lot to think about when it comes time to make these decisions. So 9 months is a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Staggers, my apologies. Please go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. How many indoor pools do we have in Sioux Falls?
With all providers? I have to go look at my list. I believe it's 2 or 3.
Okay, I guess I would assume it'd be a lot more than that, considering when you talk about, motels and hotels and...
Well, we only consider things that have public access. So that's something that the community can go to on their own.
Okay. You probably didn't deal with this issue, but I'll ask you the question anyway about financing this. Our understanding is that at this time we're thinking about taking out a loan to do this. Was that discussed or not?
No, our goal was just to provide you with what it would cost so that you could then analyze whether that was achievable and how to do it.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Jameson.
Well,
if I could, the wealth of information in this report, it's just hard to even get it all in. But the one issue I'm taking with is the Southwest District. I happen to represent still the Southwest District, and I see that you have Keene Park kind of marked as the Southwest District, and that just happens to reside in the somebody else's district. But nevertheless, the Southwest is lacking, and I would refer further south. But can you just help me appreciate that is Southwest versus what I think is Southwest?
Well, I guess if you look at the map I have up right now, I, in my mind, broke it up into quadrants, and it just basically drew a line down the center, going east and west and north and south, and that's how I came up with the definition of what I called Southwest. I do think that area is growing and needs more capacity for swimming, which is why I recommend the largest of our outdoor facilities from the toolbox. It's not just a replacement, but it's actually enhancing what's offered, which would typically even probably have a larger service area than what we're illustrating right now.
Okay.
He's saying the report is apolitical,
Yeah.
Councilor Jameson.
Okay, well, I need to put more effort into the south versus the west myself. But okay, and as well in your implementation and phasing plan, it really starts off with the indoor pool as phase 1. As the highest priority, and I assume that the park board supports all that. And then it goes to phase 2, replacing Frank Olsen. But if I go back to your scenario 1, it shows that second priority would be to add an outdoor pool to Southwest, and that isn't a part of either one in the scenario 1. I don't see it listed.
The listings prior to the implementation plan were just bullet points of all the items. It was not in a priority ranking. The reason I didn't evaluate what order they should go in until that implementation phasing slide and section, and what it really came down to was the available life of those existing facilities. Keene is, as I said, the newest of your older facilities, so it does have a good 7 to 10 years remaining in it that it will be operational, where I don't think either of the other two would make it that long. And so essentially, I was trying to make an opportunity where we wouldn't have to close down a pool prior to the replacement pool being ready.
I see. One of the things I could then, just on a general scale, this was all intended to be kind of a roadmap of how we should go and where we should go in the next 10 years or so. How we get there turns into the nasty details of it all, and the funding and the money and decisions about partnering with others to get this project, get an indoor pool built, or even these others funded for that matter, because we're talking about spending, I think, far more money than we've probably anticipated spending in the next 5 years. So it's really getting it on our radar, getting it to stick is a whole nother discussion. This is a great tool, great wealth of knowledge for us to use going forward, but the how we get it done is going to be a whole nother discussion. And I know we want to get in maybe the details of Spellerberg, but there are so many other things to get figured out before we vote tonight to build an indoor pool somewhere. But anyway, a lot of good stuff here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing all this work. I think it's going to be a great tool for the council.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your report and all your work. I appreciate it. Thanks to council for all your questions. And a reminder, we are not taking any action whatsoever on this master plan. You need to understand that that part of this master plan is on the ballot in April of 2014, and it is against state law for us to make any action. I would encourage folks who are interested in this to visit the website, siouxfalls.org, and to read the report to see what the plans would be. It really is, as Councilor Jamison said, it's a 10-year roadmap. How we get there and all of those details are part of that conversation after April 2014. And so we thank you again. The council will officially file this, and we'll move on at that point. Thank you very much. And now, for those folks who are here this afternoon, council is scheduled to go into an executive session to discuss personnel matters. That means that we will clear this room and we will meet privately to discuss personnel matters. And then we will come back, and the Public Services Committee will meet after that session. And so if you're staying for public services, we just ask that you wait in the room outside, and we'll call you back in when that time comes. So I need a motion from council for the executive session, please.
So move, Entman.
I need you to read the verbiage that's on the, sorry, thank you.
You're lucky I can read. Let's see. Where is it?
At the very bottom, item 5A.
Oh, I'm sorry. Move into executive session for personnel matters pursuant to South Dakota CL 1-25-21.
Second.
Section 1. And I need a second. I have a second from Councilor Karski. I need a voice vote then. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. I'd ask that we clear the room, please.
Thank you, Tamara.